I never imagined that my life would change completely on that cold winter's night. My name is Maria. I'm 80 years old and, until yesterday, the streets were my home. You're probably wondering how a lady of my age ended up in this situation, aren't you? Well, life has its vagaries, but I promise to tell you all about it in the next few chapters. That night, I was walking aimlessly, feeling the icy wind cut into my wrinkled skin. My stomach had been rumbling for days, and the delicious smell coming from a chic restaurant around the corner was simply irresistible. Something inside me said, "Maria, you deserve a decent meal at least once in your life." With shaky legs and a racing heart, I pushed open the heavy glass door of the establishment. The sound of clinking cutlery and animated conversations filled my ears. For a moment, I felt transported to another world. But reality soon hit me like a slap in the face. The looks of disgust and disdain from the elegant customers almost made me flinch. I heard nasty whispers. "What's that beggar doing here?" Someone call security. The maitre d', a tall, slender man, approached with an expression of displeasure. "Madam, I think you have the wrong place. This establishment is not for people like you," he said, with a condescending tone that made me feel smaller than an ant. At that moment, something inside me broke. Years of humiliation and suffering came to the surface. I could have turned around and walked out of there, but I didn't. I raised my head, looked that man in the eye, and said in a firm voice that even I didn't know I still had, "Young man, you have no idea who I am or what I'm capable of. I suggest you take me to the best table in this restaurant, because tonight, you'll have a story to tell for the rest of your lives." The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes were on me, a shabby lady defying social conventions. The maitre d', visibly disconcerted, didn't know how to react. Then an elegant gentleman got up from his table. He walked slowly towards me, his eyes fixed on mine. When he got close enough, I could see tears forming in his eyes. "Maria," he whispered, his voice laced with emotion. "Is it really you?" At that moment, my heart stopped. I knew that voice, those eyes. It was a voice from my past, a voice I thought I would never hear again. And so, my dears, begins the story of how an 80-year-old homeless woman turned the lives of everyone in that restaurant upside down. Get ready, because what's to come will surprise even the most skeptical of skeptics. The silence in the restaurant was palpable. All eyes were on me and the elegant man who had recognized me. I could feel my heart beating so hard that I thought it might leap out of my chest at any moment. "Carlos," I whispered, my voice shaking with emotion. "Is it really you?" Carlos, my first love, my childhood best friend, was standing there in front of me after 50 long years. He took my calloused hands in his, soft and well cared for. "Maria, my God, what's happened to you?" he asked, his eyes roaming over my shabby figure. Before I could answer, the maitre d' snorted, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Carlos, do you know this person?" Carlos turned to him, his eyes blazing with indignation. "This person, as you say, is Maria Oliveira. She was the best pianist this country has ever seen, and she happens to be my ex-fiancée." Whispers erupted throughout the restaurant. I could hear fragments of conversations. The pianist? The one who disappeared? I thought she was dead. My head was spinning. So many memories, so many emotions. Carlos gently guided me to his table, ignoring the shocked looks from the other customers. "Bring the best dish in the house for the lady," he ordered the waiter, who rushed over to take our order. As we waited, Carlos held my hands, his eyes never leaving mine. "Maria, all these years, where have you been? What happened?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades of secrets and pain. "It's a long story, Carlos. One I've never had the courage to tell. We have all the time in the world now," he said softly. And so, between mouthfuls of the most delicious dinner I've ever tasted, I began to unearth my past. I told him about the night of the concert, 50 years ago, when I was supposed to have performed at the Municipal Theater. The night that changed everything. I was on my way to the theater, I explained, my voice low, when I saw an accident. A car had overturned and was on fire. I couldn't just drive straight past. Carlos squeezed my hands, encouraging me to continue. I managed to get the family out of the car, but my voice faltered, the memories still vivid. There was an explosion. I was thrown far away. When I woke up, I was in an unknown hospital with no papers, no memory. Carlos' eyes widened with surprise and compassion. So that's why you disappeared? We all thought, well, it doesn't matter now. I nodded, feeling the weight of years of loneliness and confusion dissipate a little. It took me years to recover my memory, Carlos. And when I finally remembered everything, I felt ashamed. Ashamed to go back, to explain. So, I just carried on living in the shadows. The whole restaurant was silent now, everyone captured by the story unfolding in front of them. The initial prejudice had turned into a mixture of fascination and regret. Carlos, with tears in his eyes, said, "Maria, you're the bravest person I've ever met. Saving that family, giving up everything, you're a hero." At that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt for decades, hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to start again. But little did I know that the night still held more surprises. Fate had bigger plans for me, and the next chapter of my life was about to begin in a way I could never have imagined. The buzz in the restaurant increased as my story spread from table to table. Suddenly, a young waiter approached, visibly trembling. "Excuse me," he said, his voice breaking. "You said you saved a family from a burning car 50 years ago?" I nodded, puzzled by his reaction. The young man, who must have been no older than 25, fell to his knees beside our table, tears streaming down his face. "My grandmother," he sobbed. "She always told me that story. How a mysterious woman saved her, my grandfather and my father, who was just a baby at the time. She said she owed her life to an angel." My heart raced. Was it possible, after so many years, to find a connection with that fateful night? The young man continued, "My name is Pedro. My family has spent decades trying to find you, to thank you. You saved 3 generations of my family." The whole restaurant was silent now, everyone absorbed in the scene that was unfolding. Carlos shook my hand, his eyes shining with pride. "Maria," he said softly, "you didn't just save lives that night. You created a legacy." Just then, the restaurant's chef approached our table. His face was red with embarrassment. "Madam," he began, "I have no words to apologize for the way we treated you initially. Please accept this meal on the house. It's the least we can do." I thanked him with a smile, but my mind was elsewhere. 50 years of guilt and regret were beginning to dissipate. Maybe I hadn't lost everything that night after all. "Pedro," I called out to the young waiter, "could you tell me more about your family? How are they now?" Pedro sat down with us, eager to share. He talked about how his grandfather became a successful lawyer, dedicating part of his time to pro bono causes. His father was a doctor, inspired by the desire to save lives just as I had done. And Pedro, well, he was studying music at the conservatory. "Music?" I asked, feeling a spark of my old love for art rekindle. "Yes," Pedro smiled. "Piano, actually. My grandmother always said that the woman who saved them had the hands of a pianist." Carlos laughed softly. She wasn't wrong. Maria here was the most talented pianist in the country. Pedro's eyes widened. "Wait, you're Maria Oliveira? The legendary pianist who disappeared?" I nodded, a little embarrassed by the title legendary. "My God," Pedro exclaimed, "you're a legend at the conservatory. Everyone knows your compositions, studies your techniques." I was stunned. After all these years, my music was still alive? Carlos leaned over, his eyes shining with an idea. "Maria, how about playing something for us? I'm sure the restaurant wouldn't mind lending us that piano in the corner." I looked at the beautiful grand piano in the corner of the room. My fingers tingled with the desire to touch the keys again. But doubt consumed me. 50 years had passed. Could I still play? With the encouragement of everyone around me, I slowly stood up and walked over to the instrument. The silence was absolute as I sat down on the bench. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let my fingers touch the keys. And then, like magic, the music flowed. It was as if no time had passed. Notes from a composition I had written half a century ago filled the air, full of emotion and memories. When I finished, I opened my eyes to find not only the restaurant, but a crowd of people had gathered at the windows, all applauding with tears in their eyes. At that moment, I realized that my journey was not over. In fact, a new chapter was just beginning, and I couldn't wait to see what fate had in store next. The rising sun was casting its first rays through the window of the guest room in Carlos' mansion. I could hardly believe the turn my life had taken in just 24 hours. From a homeless person to a guest in a luxurious house, it was as if I had stepped into a fairy tale. I got up from the soft bed, a luxury I hadn't experienced for decades, and went to the window. The view of the well-kept garden made me smile, remembering the times when Carlos and I dreamed of a future together. A soft knock on the door brought me out of my daydreams. "Maria, may I come in?" Carlos' gentle voice sounded from the other side. "Of course, come in," I replied, adjusting the robe he had lent me. Carlos entered, carrying a tray with a breakfast that looked fit for a king. "I thought you might like something to eat before we start our busy day," he smiled. "Busy day?" I asked, curious. He nodded, his eyes shining with excitement. "After last night, things, well, let's just say they exploded. The media is abuzz about the return of the legendary missing pianist. And that's not all." As I savored the first sip of a hot, aromatic coffee, a luxury I hadn't had for years, Carlos continued. "The conservatory called. They want you to give a master class this afternoon. And in the evening, well, the municipal theater wants you to give a special performance." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What? But I haven't played for 50 years. I can't just." Carlos took my hands in his touch gentle and comforting. "Maria, last night you proved that music has never left you. It's in your blood, in your soul. You were born for it." Tears began to form in my eyes. Fear and insecurity battled with excitement and the desire to play again. "What if I fail?" I whispered. "Then you'll fail gloriously," Carlos smiled. "But I know you won't. You are Maria Oliveira, the woman who braved the fire to save strangers, who survived 50 years on the streets, who never lost her essence. A stage is nothing compared to what you've already faced." His words lit a spark inside me. He was right. I had overcome worse. What was a concert compared to decades of fighting for survival? "Okay." I took a deep breath. "Let's do this." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Stylists, makeup artists, and journalists invaded Carlos' mansion. I was transformed from the street lady to the piano diva I once was. When I arrived at the conservatory for the masterclass, I was greeted with a standing ovation. Young musicians, some even grandchildren the age I was when I disappeared, looked at me with admiration and respect. Among them was Pedro, the waiter from the night before, his eyes shining with excitement. He would be my assistant during the lesson. As I sat down at the piano, a reverent silence fell over the room. I closed my eyes, let my fingers touch the keys, and began to play. The music flowed through me like a long-dammed river, finally released. For hours, I shared not just techniques, but stories, emotions, and the passion for music that never left me, even in the darkest moments. At the end of the lesson, a young student approached me, tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Oliveira, your story, your music made me realize that we should never give up on our dreams." Her words touched my heart deeply. I realized that my journey, as difficult as it had been, could serve as an inspiration to others. As I left the conservatory, preparing for the evening concert, I felt a new energy filling me. This wasn't just my second chance, it was an opportunity to make a difference, to show the world that it's never too late to start again. The sun was setting over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was as if the universe was welcoming me back to the world of music, to the world of the living, and I was ready to embrace every moment of it. The municipal theater was packed. The buzz of the audience was like a constant hum as I waited backstage. My heart was beating so loudly that I was sure it could be heard all over Sao Paulo. Carlos was by my side, holding my hand. "You look beautiful, Maria," he whispered, his eyes shining with admiration. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The long, elegant dress, the gray hair arranged in a sophisticated bun, the soft makeup highlighting my features. It was hard to believe that this was the same woman who, just 2 days ago, was sleeping on a bench in the square. "It's time," said the theater director, appearing in the doorway. "Good luck, Donna Maria." I took a deep breath, shook Carlos' hand one last time, and walked towards the stage. The silence that fell over the theater when I stepped into the lights was deafening. I could feel thousands of eyes fixed on me. I sat down at the piano, closed my eyes for a moment, and let the memories wash over me. The last time I was on this stage was 50 years ago, the night my life changed forever. I opened my eyes, looked at the audience, and began to speak. "Good evening. Many of you must be wondering where I've been all these years, why I've disappeared." I paused, feeling the weight of each word. The truth is that I've spent the last 5 decades on the streets of this city. Anonymous. Invisible. But never for a moment have I stopped being who I was in the depths of my soul. A musician. A murmur of surprise ran through the audience. "Tonight," I continued, "I won't just be playing for you. I will play for every person who has ever felt lost, for every dream that seemed impossible, for every second chance that fate offers us." With those words, I placed my fingers on the keys and began to play. The first piece was an original composition, something that had been born in my mind during the long nights on the streets. It was a melody that spoke of loneliness, of struggle, but also of hope. As the music flowed, I felt as if each note was washing away years of pain and regret. Tears streamed down my face, but my fingers didn't falter for a second. When the last note echoed through the theater, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then, like a wave, the audience erupted into applause. People stood up, some crying openly. I played a few more pieces, alternating between classics I had played for decades and new compositions that reflected my journey. Every note was a story, every chord an emotion. At the end of the concert, I stood up to say thank you. It was then that I saw something that took my breath away. In the front row, next to Carlos, was a group of people I recognized immediately. They were homeless people I had met over the years. They were clean, well-dressed, and applauding as enthusiastically as anyone else in the audience. Later, I found out that Carlos had organized for them to be found and brought to the concert. It was his way of paying homage to the part of my life that many would prefer to forget, but which I knew was fundamental to who I had become. As I left the stage, exhausted but elated, I knew that this night was not an end, but a beginning. A rebirth not just for me, but for everyone my story could touch. The future, which had seemed bleak and uncertain for so long, now shone with endless possibilities. And I was ready to embrace every one of them. The days following the concert were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. My story had captured the public's imagination, and suddenly I found myself at the center of a media storm. Journalists, TV producers, and book publishers, everyone wanted a piece of the pianist who came back from the streets. But in the midst of all this frenzy, an idea began to form in my mind. One morning, while having coffee with Carlos on his spacious balcony, I shared my thoughts. "Carlos," I began, placing my cup on the table, "I've been thinking a lot about what to do next." He looked at me curiously. "And what do you have in mind, Maria?" I took a deep breath. "I want to use this attention, this platform I've been given, to do something meaningful, something that can really help people like me who have lived on the streets." Carlos' eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "That sounds wonderful, Maria. What exactly are you planning?" "A foundation," I replied, feeling the excitement growing inside me. "An organization that not only offers shelter and food, but also gives people the chance to rediscover their talents, their passions. Just like I rediscovered music." Carlos took my hand, squeezing it gently. "It's an incredible idea, and I'm sure many people would like to help." He was right. In the days that followed, when we shared the idea with friends and the media, the support was overwhelming. Businessmen offered donations, artists volunteered to teach classes, and even the city's mayor got in touch, offering an abandoned building in the center to be renovated and used as the foundation's headquarters. We named the project Symphony of the Streets. The aim was simple but powerful: to give homeless people not just a roof over their heads, but a chance to reconnect with their dreams and talents. The inauguration of the foundation, 3 months after my return, was an emotional event. The once decaying building now glowed with new life. There were music rooms, art studios, workshops for various crafts, and, of course, comfortable dormitories. As I cut the ribbon, I saw familiar faces in the crowd. Pedro, the young waiter, now an enthusiastic volunteer. Carlos, always by my side, smiling with pride. And many of my old street buddies, some already residents of the new center, others still hesitant but curious. In my opening speech, I couldn't hold back the tears. A few months ago, I was invisible to society. Today, I'm here, not as a celebrity reborn, but as a bridge. A bridge between two worlds that have remained separate for so long. This place is not just a shelter or a school. It's a reminder that every person, no matter their current situation, carries within them incredible potential. Sometimes all we need is a chance, someone to believe in us. The first few weeks of Sinfonia das Ruas were intense and revealing. We saw incredible talents emerge, painters who created dazzling works, musicians who made the corridors vibrate with melodies, writers who finally had a space to share their stories. One afternoon, while I was giving a piano lesson, an elderly woman timidly approached the instrument. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the keys. "I used to play," she whispered, before everything went wrong." Gently, I guided her hands over the keyboard, and together we played a simple melody. The smile that lit up her face was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. At that moment, I fully understood the purpose of my journey. Every hardship, every cold night on the streets, every moment of despair, everything had led me to this point. A point where I could not only rebuild my own life, but help others to do the same. And so, day after day, note after note, we were creating a new symphony. A symphony of hope, of second chances, and of dreams reborn. A year has passed since the inauguration of the Symphony of the Streets. Our foundation had become a beacon of hope in the city, attracting national and even international attention. But it was on an autumn afternoon that something truly extraordinary happened. I was in my office, revising some scores for the next class, when Carlos rushed in. "Maria, you need to see this," he said, turning on the television on the wall. On the screen, I saw a familiar scene, the municipal theater. But what surprised me was seeing a group of people I recognized immediately. They were residents of our foundation, all dressed up in gala outfits, walking up the stairs of the theater. The reporter explained, "In an unprecedented initiative, the Teatro Municipal de São Paulo will open its doors tonight for a very special concert." The musicians? Former homeless people who have rediscovered their talents through the Sinfonia das Ruas Foundation. My heart raced. This was something we had dreamed of, but I never imagined it would happen so soon. "Come on," said Carlos, grabbing my coat. "We can't miss it." We arrived at the theater just as the concert was about to start. The room was packed, a curious mix of cultural elite and ordinary people, all eager for what was to come. The lights dimmed, and the first musician took the stage. I recognized him immediately. It was João, a man who had lived on the streets for 30 years before joining our foundation. He sat down at the piano and, to my amazement, began to play one of Chopin's most difficult pieces with a grace and skill that rivaled any professional concert pianist. The audience stood in absolute silence, mesmerized. When João finished, there was a moment's pause before the theater erupted in applause. One after the other, our residents introduced themselves. Anna, a young woman who barely spoke when she arrived at the foundation, was now singing operatic arias with a voice that made the walls vibrate. Pedro, the waiter who had become a volunteer, surprised everyone with a violin performance that drew tears from the audience. At the interval, I was approached by an elegant gentleman who introduced himself as the director of the National Conservatory. "Dona Maria," he said, visibly moved, "what you've done is simply incredible. I'd like to propose a partnership between the Conservatoire and your foundation. We can offer scholarships, teachers, whatever it takes to nurture these extraordinary talents." I could hardly contain my excitement as I accepted his offer. It was another step towards the change we had dreamed of creating. The second part of the concert was even more surprising. A quintet made up entirely of former homeless people performed an original composition. The piece spoke of pain, of struggle, but also of hope and rebirth. It was their story, my story, the story of so many others, translated into music. When the last note echoed through the theater, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The ovation that followed lasted almost 10 minutes. At the end of the evening, while the musicians were being greeted by the audience, Carlos approached me. "Maria," he said softly, "do you realize what you've done? You haven't just changed these people's lives. You're changing the perception of an entire society." I looked around, seeing the joy on the faces of our residents, the respect and admiration in the eyes of the public, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. "No, Carlos," I replied, holding his hand. "We did it, all of us. And this is just the beginning." As we left the theater that night, under a starry sky, I felt that we were on the threshold of something truly transformative. The music had been the catalyst, but what we were creating went far beyond that. It was a new social symphony where each person, no matter what their background, had the chance to find their own melody and contribute to the harmony of the whole. And I, Maria Oliveira, at the age of 81, was more than ready to continue conducting this orchestra of change. The success of the concert at the Municipal Theater was just the beginning of a series of events that transformed not only the lives of our residents, but the very social landscape of the city. One sunny morning, I received an unexpected call. It was the city's mayor, inviting me to an urgent meeting. Intrigued, I accepted the invitation. When I arrived at the town hall, I was greeted not only by the mayor, but by a group of businessmen, community leaders, and even some famous artists. "Dona Maria," began the mayor, "what you've been doing with Sinfonia das Ruas has inspired us to think bigger. We want to propose an ambitious project to transform an abandoned area of the city into a cultural and housing complex for people in vulnerable situations." My heart raced at the possibility. The mayor continued, describing a plan that included not only decent housing, but also spaces for art, music, education, and entrepreneurship. "We want Sinfonia das Ruas to be at the heart of this project," he concluded. "Their experience and vision will be fundamental." In the months that followed, we plunged headlong into this new challenge. It was a period of intense work, endless meetings, and sometimes frustrating obstacles. But with each problem that arose, I remembered the cold nights on the streets and found the strength to keep going. The project, which we named Harmony City, began to take shape. Abandoned buildings were renovated, squares were revitalized, and little by little, a new community began to flourish. One afternoon, while walking around the construction site with Carlos, I was surprised by a familiar sound. It was music coming from one of the newly renovated buildings. We followed the sound and found a group of our former residents giving a music lesson to neighborhood children. João, the pianist who had impressed everyone at the Municipal Theater, was leading the class with a beaming smile on his face. "Professor Maria," exclaimed one of the children when she saw me. "Uncle João said it was you who taught him to play again. Can you teach us too?" Overcome with emotion, I sat down among the children and began to show them the basic notes on the small keyboard they had. Seeing the sparkle in the eyes of those children, some of whom I knew came from difficult situations, made me realize the true impact of what we were doing. As the project progressed, we began to see changes not only physically, but also in people's mindsets. Old prejudices began to dissipate. People who used to cross the street to avoid a homeless person now stopped to listen to their stories and music. One day, I received an unexpected visitor in my office. She was an elegant lady who introduced herself as the wife of an important businessman in the city. "Dona Maria," she began, hesitantly, I wanted to apologize. I was one of the people who mocked you that night in the restaurant. Since then, I've been following your journey and, well, you've opened my eyes. I'd like to volunteer, if you'll have me." I hugged her, feeling that every little gesture like this was a victory against indifference and prejudice. On the day of the official inauguration of Harmony City, I looked around and could hardly believe my eyes. Where once there had been abandonment and despair, now there was life, music, and hope. Carlos approached, holding my hand. "You know," he said softly, When I met you in that restaurant 2 years ago, I never imagined we'd get here. I smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. Neither did I, Carlos. But this proves that it's never too late to start again and make a difference. As we watched the happy crowd around us, people from all walks of life living together harmoniously, I felt that we really had created something special. It wasn't just a housing project or a social program. It was a new model of society where every individual, regardless of their background, had the opportunity to contribute their own unique note to the great symphony of life. And I, at 82, was more inspired than ever to continue this journey, this music that, I hoped, would echo for generations. 2 years had passed since the inauguration of Harmony City. The project had become a model of success, attracting national and international attention. Delegations from other cities and even other countries came regularly to learn from our experience. One spring morning, while I was having breakfast on the balcony of my small apartment in Cidade Harmonia, I received a call that would once again change the course of my life. It was the Minister of Culture. Dona Maria, he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. The federal government wants to expand the Cidade Harmonia model to the whole country. We would like you to lead this national project. I was speechless for a moment. At 84, I should have been thinking about retiring, not starting a new challenge on a national scale. But something inside me lit up at the possibility. Minister, I replied after a pause, it's an honor and a huge responsibility. Can I give it some thought and discuss it with my team? He agreed, and I spent the day thinking and talking with Carlos and the key members of our foundation. The opinion was unanimous. We should accept. The following week, I found myself in Brasilia, presenting our vision to the president and his cabinet. I spoke not just about music and art, but about dignity, opportunity, and the transformative power of believing in people. What we did in Sao Paulo, I concluded, was not a miracle. It was the result of hard work, compassion, and the belief that every human being has value and potential. We can and must replicate this throughout the country. The project was enthusiastically approved, and over the next few months we plunged into a whirlwind of activity. We traveled around Brazil, from large metropolises to small towns in the countryside, adapting the Harmony City model to local realities. In each place, we encountered unique challenges, but also inspiring stories. In a small town in the Northeast, for example, we discovered a group of artisans who were creating incredible musical instruments from recycled materials. We immediately incorporated this idea into our national program. One day, during a visit to a project under construction in Rio de Janeiro, I was approached by a young journalist. Dona Maria, she asked, at 84, what motivates you to keep working at this intense pace? I looked at the construction site around us, where future residents were working side by side with volunteers and professionals, and smiled. My dear, I replied, every life transformed, every smile restored, every talent discovered is fuel for my soul. Besides, I added with a wink, who said that at 84 we should stop dreaming and achieving. As the national project progressed, we began to see changes not only in individual lives, but in the very culture of the country. Music, art, and solidarity were becoming powerful tools for social transformation. Universities began offering courses based on our model. Companies created social responsibility programs inspired by Sinfonia das Ruas. And, most importantly, we saw a gradual change in public perception of people in vulnerable situations. One evening, while watching a national concert on TV, where musicians from all our projects performed together, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Carlos, sitting next to me, shook my hand. You've built something incredible, Maria, he said softly. I shook my head. We built it, Carlos. All of us. And we've only just begun. That night, lying in my bed, I reflected on the incredible journey my life had been. From the streets to the national stage, from being invisible to inspiring millions. But what moved me most was not the honors or recognition, but the certainty that we had created something that would continue far beyond us. The distant sound of music coming from the square lulled me to sleep, and I dreamed, oh,